How's everyone doing today? Awesome. Excited to be here. Thank you, Jessica and the Now Marketing team for having me another year here in Lima. Wow, okay, so let's jump right into it. So today I'm going to talk about future-proofing your digital brand. I'm going to hop on my soapbox and rant and rave about marketing, where we are in terms of marketing, and what we can do as marketers moving forward. So I'm going to present a lot of information here. So feel free to take as many notes as possible. Of course, if you're engaging on social media, make sure you use the conference hashtag and tag me at Juntae DeLane. All right. So when we talk about future-proofing our brand, we have to consider some events that took place that caused a catalyst in how brands are able to communicate with their target audience. So what I want to do is I want to go back to the future. I'm sure you guys remember that movie. But let's hop in our DeLoreans and set the flex capacitor to 2008. You guys remember this? Occupy Wall Street movement. So this was a time where consumers were fed up with the shady and unethical business practices of the housing and the financial industries. So they occupied Wall Street. And this was a catalyst for the way in which brands were able to communicate with their target audience, because now they had to become more transparent. They had to make sure they're conveying their company's ethos. You start to see CMOs and CEOs at the forefront of their organizations because people wanted to do business with people at that time. And if you had the word corporate in your name, you probably removed it around that time because it had a negative connotation. So that's one event that serves as a catalyst. The next event, you guys remember this? Me Too movement. This was a time where consumers made sure that brands were accountable for who they associated themselves with, even the events that they sponsored, right? Now, this was a time where you would think that individuals would associate themselves, or organizations would associate themselves with people who have not done any presumably deplorable acts, but ultimately when they do, and those individuals think, for example, harass is 2 words, there's a disconnect in trust. You guys caught that right there? All right. There's a distrust and authenticity, it's broken. Let's fast forward to a little more recent, Black Lives Matter movement. Now this is what I think was the largest civil rights movement of our lifetime. When you consider the activations that took place on social media. But this event was a catalyst because I started to notice a difference in corporate communications. Those organizations had a focus on diversity. I started to see essentially more black people on TV. In fact, these were industries where I saw these black people that were very non-traditional. Healthcare, banking, so on. I saw individuals on websites and just more diversity in their communication. And these organizations had a priority to focus on more diversity. So there's a shift in the way that they're communicating things during this time. And all of this has happened during the worst pandemic of our lifetime. And this pandemic obviously affected many, many different industries. And it caused a change in the behavior of consumers and the way in which they engage with brands, because ultimately they could not step foot into a brick and mortar location. So when we think about all of these events that took place that served as a catalyst for change in the way in which we communicate with our target audiences as brands, how can you all prepare for the new normal? And when focusing on preparing for the new normal, it's the first step to really future-proofing your digital brand. So that's essentially what I want to talk about today, is I want to rant and rave about all the things that I think can help you all future-proof your digital brand. So For those of you who may not have a good idea about me and what I do, some of you may not know this, but I actually started my marketing career as a DJ. And in the San Francisco Bay Area, I also developed an entertainment social network back in the day when some other guy on the East Coast had his social network that was only for college students that I never thought would go anywhere, but obviously it did. And then I'm also the founder of Digital Branding Institute as well, which essentially is a brain dump. I wanted to get a PhD, but decided it was more of an ego play than anything, so I just created a blog and created content around digital branding. I was also the former senior digital brand manager for the University of Southern California, and now I serve as the founder and chief strategist of Juntae DeLane. So essentially what I want to do is I want to gather all of my experience that I've gathered over the years and really kind of pull back the curtain and give you some of the strategies and tactics that I use when developing brands for many organizations as well as high-profile individuals. So how can we get there? When thinking about future-proofing our brand, what are the core things that we should think about? Certainly the pandemic, right? Certainly the metaverse, as well as how we're going to leverage Web 3.0. I know we had some great presenters earlier on. I want to add on to some of the things that they were mentioning earlier on. So that's what I want to focus on today. Sound fair? All right. So let's talk about the pandemic. When we think about the pandemic, we should think about our new customer. I use air quotes because our customers have changed, right? And the customers that we think we're targeting ultimately are impacted by the pandemic. Their challenges, their needs, their beliefs were slightly altered because it's a very impactful situation, right? When we think about change with regard to the pandemic, we must understand that more than likely, a lot of things that happened during the pandemic are going to persist in terms of the beliefs of the target audience. And in this Forrester survey, the majority of the respondents believe that the pandemic is going to drive long-term changes. So when we think about this new customer, we already have an idea that anytime someone interacts with your brand, especially if it's their first time, more than likely it's going to be in the digital space. So we would need to go a little double down on our digital brand because those consumers are interacting in a way that they probably haven't before. Meaning, since content consumption has increased, they're taking a deeper dive in your digital brand, and they may not be in a position to actually purchase, but they just may want to engage. And why this is important to note is because during the pandemic, corporate communications have to become more personal. And that means that we should focus on that brand voice. Now, I think this is something that is commonplace, but it's always good to refresh and renew and really look at how your brand voice is actually connecting with your target audience. And when we think about the impact of the pandemic, we would understand that because they're taking a deeper dive into our brands and may not be in the position to purchase, that they may just simply want to engage. And a great case study for that is the Wendy's roast. Now, this is a classic case study. I absolutely love it. But what's so spectacular about the Wendy's roast is they essentially went from servitude to attitude. They roasted every single person that had interacted with their brand online and even competitors, right? And Hamburger Helper even took a play from their playbook, and they say here, PSA, knowing how to mix Hamburger Helper doesn't make you wife material. And then Hamburger Helper jumps in and says, and this makes you husband material? And then another user says, drag him, you sexy ass glove. And another says, OMG, all these food accounts becoming some clapback champs, and I love it. Now, what's important to note here is that on social platforms, customers don't want to be helped, they want to be engaged. I'll let that sink in for a little bit. On social platforms, customers don't want to be helped, they want to be engaged. So what does that mean for marketers? Well, when we think about our brand voice, we want to make sure that we are personal. And this is something, again, that is commonplace, but we have to double down on it because we know that there's shift in trends and consumer behavior in the way in which these consumers are engaging with our brands. And it also means that when we think about social media in general, let's say for the very first Social Media Week Lima event, there were sessions on customer behavior, right? You don't really see that anymore. It doesn't matter what conference you go to now, anything regarding social media, there's probably not going to be a customer service track on that conference. Why is that? Well, it's because on social platforms, customers want to be engaged and not necessarily helped. So from a brand voice perspective, looking at consumer behavior during the pandemic, we understand for those brands who are engaging, who are personal and have a personalized brand voice, are going to be the ones that consumers remember when they are in the need for their offering. I also take a look at another perspective here. As I look around the room, I don't see anyone with a tie. Why is that? Well, because trends change. And in some industries, if you walk into a room, into a meeting with a suit and tie, it can impact the outcome of that meeting, right? So these are all the things that you should consider when changing up your brand voice. And now my next step is day parting. When you're looking to future-proof your brand, you should consider day parting. And if you are an individual who had worked in the broadcast industry, I'm sure you know this terminology. And if you don't, day parting essentially is time-based marketing. It's marketing around the time that people are actually going to consume your content, as an example. Now, how many of you here are working remotely, by a show of hands? Significant percentage of the room. Now I'm going to ask you another serious question. If you were asked to go back to the office, how many of you would consider leaving your job? Some of you didn't raise your hand because your boss is sitting right next to you, so go ahead and give me like a wink, a SOS or something, right? But the reason why that's important is because when considering your day parts, you want to make sure that you're referencing those individuals that are part of your target audience that are working remotely. And when I surveyed the room here, the sentiment is essentially the same for this FlexJob survey. Most of the respondents want to continue to work remotely and would even consider leaving their job if they were forced to go back to the office. So when we think about the day parts of these individuals, we must consider the fact that instead of them going to the gym in the morning, they may hop on their Peloton. Or instead of going to a coffee shop, they go to the kitchen. Instead of going to their work desk, they go to their laptop. Or instead of going home, they go on vacation. Because we all know that's what remote work affords, right? So what does this mean for us as marketers? Well, we probably have our CRM system that has our communication baked into the specific times that we think that content is going to be consumed. But now there's a shift in consumer behavior, and the pandemic is a catalyst for that. So if you have your email communication, for example, set up to have those newsletters go out on a Tuesday because God forbid you wouldn't have it go out on a Monday because everyone's inbox is full on a Monday. Well, now you may want to consider moving that newsletter to a weekend. Why? Because we have a little bit more work-life balance and some people may check their emails during the weekend. Or instead of sending that email out on 1 p.m. on a Tuesday because we know it's going to be after lunch and more than likely you're going to get more email open rates, well, at this point, what's lunch? Right? What's lunch? We just eat, right? Because those who are working remotely are able to do exactly that. So when thinking about future-proofing your brand, consider the new day parts of your target audience. Another tip is to review your buyer's journey. Now, I'm sure we all have our buyer's journey that is very linear, and we have our funnels set, and we have all of our communications locked in, and so on and so forth. But from when we look at the pandemic, that buyer's journey is starting to become elongated, right? It's starting to take a little bit longer for us to convert our prospects. How many of you are in the B2B space right now? Yeah, so you may have noticed that, right? You may have noticed it takes a little bit longer to convert. And so what does this mean? Well, it means that there's larger gaps in that buyer's journey. So my recommendation would be to leverage content and collaborate on content to help fill in some of those gaps. But this content must be ephemeral. It must be quick. And we think about quick content, let's consider the way that content is rolled out on other major networks or major platforms such as Netflix or Hulu or Disney Plus or whatever, right? Most new pieces of content are now episodic. Why? Well, because that's just the way it is, right? We leave the science to the scientists. They understand this. And so these are the same way that we should roll out content for our brands. And when we think about content overall, content no longer has a beginning, middle, and end. Content is now starting to become very episodic, to have bite-sized pieces of content that tell an overarching brand story. So as our buyer's journey is elongated and there's deeper gaps in that journey, we need to fill in those gaps with those bite-sized pieces of content so that it can tell our brand story over time. So that would be my recommendation there when future-proofing your brand. Now let's get into the metaverse. We obviously are thinking about ways in which we can enhance our brands. So the metaverse is certainly a discussion that we should have. One movie that I think really encapsulates what the metaverse is Ready Player One. Some of you may think of The Matrix or Inception, but I think this encapsulates it. And when we think about the metaverse, you can consider it a fusion between the virtual and physical worlds. And AR, augmented reality, is essentially your reality that's augmented, and it's augmented through some type of device. You guys remember the Google Glasses? You guys probably seen some people walking around with Google Glasses, and I don't know, it's kind of jerky, right? But people really didn't appreciate or really adopt what that was. But now I think they're starting to, and they're really being forced to based on what Meta's initiatives are. But when we think about augmented reality, you actually can experience augmented reality if you have Google Maps on your phone. You type in the directions, you're able to actually see through your phone which directions to walk. If you guys haven't noticed that, you guys should try it. That's an example of augmented reality. And then when we think about virtual realities, it's completely a virtual reality with a headset that you can experience a part of this reality, right? So that's a very, very baseline overview of what the metaverse is. And how you should think about it as a brand is, let's understand the business of social media. If you understand the business of social media, you would be able to crush it in the metaverse. Now, why do I say that? Why did Facebook, now Meta, even create the metaverse? They've invested earlier into Oculus, so they knew that this was coming, but how can we as brands begin to leverage this initiative? The first thing to think about is ad space. I think that's one of the reasons why the metaverse was actually created by Meta, or enhanced by Meta, is because they wanted end-to-end attribution for advertising. If you guys have any paid media campaigns going on right now, you know the impact of the iOS update, right? There is no longer end-to-end attribution. So what the metaverse does for Facebook is it connects the dots. Now they're able to see in the metaverse how long a consumer has looked at a specific product. Now they're able to create these experiences that generate all these data points that would help to fuel their advertising campaigns. So this is another platform that you're able to use when engaging with your target audience. If you have a store, you're able to create virtual malls in the metaverse where they're able to actually see the product and so on. You're able to add those products to your avatar. Here's a cool avatar. It's actually a picture of my bobblehead doll from a couple years ago, Social Media Week Lemon. But what's interesting here is you're able to take certain purchases and add them to your avatar. So what you can do as marketers is use the metaverse as a way to increase revenue if you have an e-com shop. Meaning if I were to buy a pair of jeans online, I can take that same pair of jeans and buy the digital asset for that jeans and put that on my avatar. And through blockchain, it'll prove that that's custom bespoke pair of jeans, as an example, from a specific retailer. So these are ways that you can think about going into the metaverse. And when we consider the specific strategies for how to do so, we'd essentially want to think about the metaverse as being an extension of your field marketing. If you can't wrap your head around how can you get into the metaverse, think about it as that, right? If you have a field marketing initiative, and field marketing is sending out your reps here at an event, setting up a table, that's all a part of field marketing, right? Creating that experience at a specific event. Think about doing that in the metaverse. And a tip for that is to focus on leveraging your online presence to convert. That is my first tip. And my ultimate recommendation is that if you are not crushing it online, I don't think you'll be able to crush it in the metaverse. Focus on your target audience as well. However your target audience is utilizing the digital space is how you should implement your activations in the metaverse. Focus on experience, because experience is key. As I mentioned earlier, when you're having a field marketing activation, what experience do you want your target audience to have? If you want to have that same experience in the virtual world, you can basically replicate that in the digital space. Making your business's experience is very important, because if you think about having your brand in the metaverse and it's just a static presence, and you don't have that connection, that experience that's there, then why be in a virtual world, right? If you don't have the experience top of mind and a first priority. If you have a game, you want to make sure that the controls stimulate real-life action, right? I know that's a little bit advanced, but those are some key things that you'd want to think about if you're engaging or creating a presence in the metaverse. And make sure that your items are more than just 2 dimensions. Make sure that it has more of an experience of just having someone see that specific item or offering. And know what you want your customers to feel, right? When I look at the crowd here in this room, there's a feeling, there's a vibe, there's a mood here. So how can we replicate that feeling, vibe, and mood in the metaverse? Aim your resources towards emotions. Funnel that emotion towards the product, because this experience is ultimately going to make customers loyal, right? So this is essentially some of the key priorities that you should have if you want to establish a presence in the metaverse. And lastly, get comfortable with cryptocurrencies. I'm sure we all know what they are now, but really get comfortable with cryptocurrencies, because in a virtual world, virtual currency is key. It unlocks all of the transactions and interactions in the virtual space. And lastly, when focusing on future-proofing your digital brand, we have to consider Web 3.0. I know Jessica talked earlier about Web 3.0 and sort of how we got from Web 1.0 to Web 3.0, but I basically consider Web 1.0 just simply text on a page, black and white, text on a page, right? I know you remember AOL, America Online. They send you those CD-ROMs to your house and got to plug it into your dial-in and go all that stuff, right? Web 2.0 is really where there's more interactivity, right, than just using AOL Instant Messenger as an example, right? You had Facebook, now Meta, Twitter, Uber, Lyft, like it's Airbnb. There's more of a community around our interactions online. And with Web 3.0, all that has become decentralized, meaning if you're on a device, you used to ping a server, that server would then give you information. With Web 3.0, you're accessing a web, essentially a web of information, and there's not one central source of where you're receiving your information. It's become decentralized. And what's important here is to consider as marketers how we can leverage Web 3.0. When we look at some of the privacy issues that are out there with regard to the Cambridge Analytica data breach, right? Consumers are now more concerned about controlling their privacy and their data. So as brands, if we think about future-proofing our brands, we should certainly consider leveraging blockchain and Web 3.0 so that we can showcase our transparency within our communications and that we are open and trustworthy. And one of the ways to guarantee that is by leveraging Web 3.0. So here's what I'll leave you with. The path to success is completely virtual. The world is already being set. Those who walk the path first will ultimately own it. So I wanted to give you some insights and key takeaways that would help you be first to market when it comes to future-proofing your brand and leveraging the pandemic and the change in consumer behavior, as well as focusing on updating your brand voice and focusing on the day parts, the changing day parts of your consumers, and then be able to think about honing in and doubling down on digital to make sure that you're able to convert your target audience in the digital space before even thinking about going into the metaverse. And then focusing on leveraging Web 3.0 because it's upcoming trend, emerging trend, that consumers want to take back control of their privacy and their data. And if you're able to leverage the blockchain, you would be perceived as a company that is open and trustworthy. So really quickly, I want to make sure that I leave you guys with something. I have a template here that I use for all of our brand strategy workshops. These are the exact templates. It's about a 3-hour workshop, and I want to give it to you guys. It's highly valuable. And so go ahead and feel free to take a picture there. I'm going to go ahead and change the slide. And ultimately, I want to thank you guys for listening to my talk. Again, I rant and rave about all things future-proofing your digital brand. I hope you guys were able to take at least one piece of information, gain one insight that will at least make you think about future-proofing your brand or change some of the strategy that you currently have now. With that said, thank you guys for listening, and let's connect online.